My fiancée laughed, saying another man was better in bed than me while our relatives chuckled. So I silently took my bank card she'd been stealing from and left. Next day, I saw 20 missed calls when her restaurant payment failed. Sup Reddit, I'm a 29-year-old guy who has been with my girlfriend Madison for 3 years now. She's 26, and we originally met at a shipping company's holiday party back when I was working as an operations coordinator for a logistics firm. I was making decent money with good benefits and a solid commission structure, while she had just started as the receptionist. Madison always introduced herself as being in administration, but the reality was that she just answered phones and looked pretty at the front desk, making around $30,000 or so. Let me give you some background about myself first. I grew up in a blue-collar family in Detroit, where my dad worked as an electrician and my mom worked part-time at a department store. They taught me the value of hard work and living within your means, lessons that have shaped everything I do. I put myself through college with scholarships and working nights as a security guard, which wasn't easy, but taught me discipline. I got my logistics certification right after graduation and started at the bottom, working my way up through sheer determination and consistent effort. By the time I met Madison, I was managing some high-end shipping contracts for corporate clients. No handouts, no family money, just consistent effort and smart choices. Madison, on the other hand, comes from a completely different background. She grew up in an upper-middle-class family in the suburbs, where her dad works as some kind of investment banker, and her mom never had to work a day in her life. They paid for her communications degree at a private college, which she's never really used before landing her receptionist job. Before that, she bounced between various retail positions and social media consulting gigs that never seemed to last more than a few months. Despite all of this, she was absolutely gorgeous. Brunette hair, gym-toned body, always dressed in designer clothes. I guess I was so smitten that I somehow managed to ignore all the red flags that were right there in front of me. After about a year of dating, we decided to move in together. I had just bought a 2-bedroom condo in a decent part of the city. Nothing luxurious by any means, but it was clean, modern, and located in a safe neighborhood with good appreciation potential. I was genuinely proud of what I had accomplished, and Madison agreed to split the household expenses. However, somehow her half of the utilities was always coming next week, and her name never actually made it onto the lease agreement. I didn't push the issue because I thought we were building something meaningful together, something that would last. Looking back now, there were warning signs everywhere that I should have noticed. Madison would make these little passive-aggressive comments about my car, a perfectly good 4-year-old Honda that she called cute, but not what she pictured herself in long term. She would sigh dramatically whenever her friends posted vacation photos from places like Cabo or Hawaii, then ask why we only took weekend trips to upstate New York or Vermont. She'd come home with $400 worth of clothes and justify it by saying she needed them for work at a reception desk, where nobody could even see her full outfit. But I was completely in love and convinced myself these were just small quirks I could live with. Fast forward to last Thursday, which happened to be my 29th birthday. I didn't want anything fancy or elaborate, just a simple, intimate gathering with the people who mattered most to me. I invited our regular crew over to my place around 6 p.m. My best friend Connor and his girlfriend Chloe, my college buddy Tyler, my colleague Marcus, and a couple of other close friends. I had planned a casual cookout on my small balcony, followed by some board games and maybe watching the game on TV. It was exactly the kind of low-key celebration I prefer. Nothing extravagant, just good friends and good times. However, Madison had been acting strange all week leading up to my birthday. She was constantly on her phone, seeming distant and distracted whenever we tried to have a conversation. She was taking an unusual number of selfies and obsessively checking her social media accounts throughout the day. She kept asking me what I was planning for my birthday, and when I told her about the small get-together I had organized, she seemed genuinely disappointed. "That's it?" she asked with this tone that made it clear she expected something much more elaborate. I reminded her that we were supposed to be saving money for a trip to Colorado the following month, a trip that I was secretly planning to turn into a proposal getaway. Because of this, I didn't want to spend money on anything extravagant for my birthday. Everyone arrived right on schedule around 6 p.m., but there was no sign of Madison anywhere. She sent me a text saying she was running late but would pick up something special on the way over. By 7 p.m., we had already finished eating and were just hanging out in the living room, chatting and enjoying each other's company. That's when she finally showed up, nearly 90 minutes late to her own boyfriend's birthday party. But she wasn't alone. Madison walked through my front door wearing a dress I had never seen before, something that I later discovered cost $850. With her was this tall guy in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit. "Everyone, this is Blake," she announced with this bright, almost theatrical smile. "He just started as the new logistics director at our company. I was at the same client meeting as him this afternoon, so I invited him to join us tonight. Let me be clear about how bizarre this situation was. Madison had invited a complete stranger to my intimate birthday gathering without asking me first. And somehow, according to her story, this guy Blake had been at a client meeting with a receptionist, which made absolutely no sense given our company's structure. Something wasn't adding up at all, but I didn't want to create a scene or make my friends uncomfortable. I politely introduced myself to Blake and welcomed him to my home, though the confused and slightly concerned looks from my friends told me they found this situation just as weird and inappropriate as I did. Almost immediately, I noticed how Madison was behaving around this Blake character. She was laughing at absolutely everything he said, even when it wasn't remotely funny. She kept touching his arm during conversation and flipping her hair in that exaggerated way she did when she was trying to be flirtatious. Blake himself was the stereotypical corporate climber type. Expensive watch that he made sure everyone noticed by constantly checking the time, designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and this condescending tone whenever he spoke. When he asked about my little logistics business, his voice dripped with barely concealed disdain. Throughout the evening, Blake kept making these passive-aggressive comments about my place being charming and cozy. Keep in mind, this is my 200-square-foot condo that I worked overtime for years to afford. He asked if I rented or owned with a smug look on his face, as if an operations coordinator couldn't possibly own property. "I bought it 2 years ago," I told him proudly. "Actually got in before the neighborhood really took off in value, so it's been a good investment." Blake nodded with what I can only describe as pity in his eyes. "Smart," he said, looking around my home like it was some kind of quaint museum exhibit. "Though I just closed on a penthouse downtown with views of the entire skyline. When you're ready to upgrade, I can connect you with my agent." Connor shot me a look that clearly said, "Who the hell is this guy?" which I definitely appreciated. Chloe, bless her heart, tried to change the subject by suggesting we play some games to lighten the mood. We eventually settled on Never Have I Ever. I know it sounds childish, but it's kind of a tradition in our friend group, and usually leads to some good laughs and harmless embarrassment. The game started off normal enough, with the usual harmless questions that everyone expects. We went through the typical stuff like, never have I ever broken a bone, never have I ever gotten a speeding ticket, and other standard topics that usually generate some lighthearted teasing and friendly ribbing. The atmosphere was relaxed, and for a moment I thought maybe things would settle into a normal evening despite Blake's unexpected presence. Then Blake, who had been whispering with Madison throughout most of the game, said with this knowing smirk plastered across his face, "Never have I ever faked being satisfied in bed." The moment those words left his mouth, I saw Madison's face absolutely light up with this cruel, almost malicious excitement. Without any hesitation, she raised her water glass, took a deliberate sip, and looked directly at me with a smirk that I'll never forget. "Blake would know," she said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly. "He satisfies me in ways you never could. It's amazing what a difference real ambition makes." The room went completely silent. I felt like someone had just punched me in the stomach with all their strength, knocking every bit of air out of my lungs. My friends all froze where they were sitting, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. They kept looking between Madison, Blake, and me, trying to process what had just happened. I saw Connor's jaw clench with barely controlled anger, while Chloe covered her mouth in shock, clearly horrified by what she had just witnessed. Tyler was staring at the floor, obviously uncomfortable and not knowing where to look or what to say. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I was giving her a chance to walk it back, to claim it was some kind of terrible joke, to say anything that might salvage the situation. Instead, Madison doubled down with a vengeance. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive," she said with this dismissive wave of her hand. "Everyone knows we've been having problems anyway. Blake takes me to 5-star restaurants and buys me things I actually want, not just what he thinks I should want. Maybe if you'd aimed higher than coordinating other people's shipments, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere for what I deserve." Blake had the absolute audacity to put his arm around her shoulder and give me this pitying look, like I was some pathetic creature deserving of his sympathy. "No hard feelings, man," he said with this fake concerned tone. These things happen, you know. Madison says you're a nice guy, just not going anywhere, if you know what I mean. In that moment, I could have exploded. I could have yelled, thrown things, made a complete scene in front of all my friends. The rage was building inside me like a pressure cooker about to burst. But something strange happened instead. Something inside me just completely shut down. With perfect, crystal clear clarity, I suddenly saw my relationship for exactly what it really was, and had probably been for a long time. I stood up calmly, grabbed my wallet and keys from the counter where I had left them, and walked straight to the door without saying a single word. "Where are you going?" Madison called after me, and I noticed she sounded more annoyed than concerned, like I was inconveniencing her by leaving. "It's your birthday party." I didn't respond to her. I didn't look back at anyone. I didn't try to explain myself or make any kind of dramatic exit speech. I simply closed the door behind me and walked to my car, my hands surprisingly steady as I started the engine. I drove straight to a hotel downtown, checked in for the night, and immediately turned off my phone. I needed complete silence and isolation to process what had just happened. When I finally turned my phone back on the next morning, I discovered I had 49 missed calls and over 25 text messages waiting for me. 31 of those calls were from Madison, while the rest were from my friends who had witnessed the entire humiliating spectacle. I wasn't ready to deal with any of it yet. Not her attempts at damage control, not my friends' concern and sympathy, not any of it. So here's my question for everyone. Am I the asshole for walking out of my own birthday party? Should I have confronted them instead of just leaving like that? Part of me wonders if I should have stayed and fought for my relationship, or at least demanded an explanation in front of everyone. But honestly, in that moment, I felt like there was nothing left to fight for. Edit 1. Thank you all for the overwhelming support and advice in the comments. I'm reading through everything and will try to respond to some of the questions people have been asking. To clarify a few things that keep coming up. Yes, Madison does have access to my apartment since I gave her a key about 6 months ago. No, she doesn't contribute anything to the mortgage payments, but she occasionally buys groceries and claims that counts as her contribution to household expenses. And no, I honestly didn't suspect she was cheating until this exact moment, though looking back now, there were definitely signs that I chose to ignore or rationalize away. Edit 2. The aftermath, 4 days later. First, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment and send me private messages of support. I never expected this post to get so much attention, and the overwhelming consensus seems to be that I'm not the asshole here, which is honestly a huge relief because I've been second-guessing myself constantly since that night. It's been 4 days since everything went down, and I finally worked up the courage to call Connor yesterday to find out what happened after I walked out. What he told me makes my blood boil even more than the original incident. According to Connor, after I left, Madison apparently laughed and said, "Oh my God, he's so sensitive! Can't even take a joke!" Blake stayed for another full hour with his arm around Madison the entire time, acting like they owned the place. My friends were too shocked and uncomfortable to know exactly how to handle the situation. Connor said he finally stood up and told them both to get the fuck out of my apartment. Madison got all pissy about it, saying things like, "I practically live here, and who do you think pays for half the stuff in this place?" Which is complete bullshit, since she's never contributed a single dime to my mortgage or any of the furniture. According to Connor, Chloe finally lost it at that point and told Madison, "You don't deserve him. He's worked for everything he has while you just take and take without giving anything back." Madison apparently threw a glass of water at her, narrowly missing Chloe's head and shattering against the wall behind her. That's when Connor physically escorted them both out of my apartment, threatening to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. The next morning, Tyler went by my place to check on things for me. Nothing was broken inside, but Madison's car was still parked in the guest parking spot, which meant she had likely come back sometime during the night and spent it there with Blake. The thought of them in my bed makes me physically sick. I finally force myself to check my messages, and Madison's texts are honestly a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Let me share the progression. First batch, sent around midnight. "Why the fuck would you leave your own party? So immature. Blake thinks you're ridiculous. If you can't handle a joke, maybe you're not the man I thought you were." Second batch, sent around 2 a.m. "Hello? Are you seriously ghosting me after 3 years together over a joke? You're embarrassing yourself." Third batch, sent the next morning. "Baby, please talk to me. I don't know what I was thinking. Blake means nothing to me. I was just trying to make you jealous because you've been so distant lately, working all those extra hours." Last batch, sent yesterday. "I made a mistake. We all make mistakes. You're really going to throw away 3 years over one bad night? That's not the man I fell in love with. Call me. Notice the pattern here? She starts by attacking me and making me out to be the problem. Then she gets angry when I don't respond to her abuse. Then she pivots to begging and trying to minimize what happened. Finally, she tries to make me feel guilty for throwing away the relationship. The same relationship that she just publicly demolished in front of all my friends. It's the classic narcissist playbook, and I can't believe I never saw it before. I called my boss on Tuesday and made up a family emergency to get a few days off work. He was completely understanding about it, which I really appreciated. As for what I'm going to do now, I honestly don't fucking know. 3 years is a long time to throw away, and part of me keeps wondering if I'm overreacting to what happened. But then I keep replaying that moment in my head. The look on Madison's face when she took that sip and looked directly at me. She looked proud, like she was genuinely enjoying humiliating me in front of everyone I care about. And then there was her comment about my career, dismissing everything I've worked so hard to build as if it meant nothing. I've worked my ass off to build a respectable position in logistics coordination. I'm not a millionaire, but I make good money, have solid investments, and I'm on track to start my own boutique shipping firm in a few years. My career trajectory is something I'm genuinely proud of. But apparently that's not good enough for Madison. Even if we somehow managed to get past this incident, I know I'd never be able to forget it. Every time I looked at her, I'd remember how she stood there next to some douche in his expensive suit and told all my friends that I wasn't good enough for her. I keep thinking about how she compared my career to whatever Blake does, as if all those designer clothes and expensive hair appointments that I paid for over the years meant absolutely nothing. The more I think about our relationship, the more I realize how one-sided it really was. I never cheated on her, never even considered it. When you're unhappy in a relationship, you talk about the problems like adults. You don't sleep with someone else for months and then humiliate your partner in front of their friends. I'm staying at the hotel through the weekend to give myself time to think. I'll go back to the apartment early next week when I know she's at work to grab some clothes and other essentials. I need to figure out what my next move is going to be. Edit 3. Moving on, 1 week later. This will probably be my last update for a while since things are still unfolding and I'm trying to process everything. But I wanted to let you all know what's happened since my last edit. I went back to the apartment on Wednesday when I knew Madison would be at work. I found that a bunch of her stuff was already gone, mainly the expensive items I had bought for her over the years, like the designer handbags and the tablet I got her last Christmas. She had left her key on the kitchen counter along with a handwritten letter. 4 pages of her perfect cursive handwriting on pink stationery with a heart dotting every I. It was so typical of her to make even this dramatic. I read it once and immediately threw it in the trash. The basic gist of the letter was that she'd been unhappy for months, but didn't know how to tell me. She said I was too focused on saving money and being practical, and that she needed someone who could match her lifestyle aspirations. She and Blake had apparently been sleeping together for 6 months. 6 fucking months. She claimed they tried to fight the attraction, but couldn't help themselves, which is complete bullshit. But here's the real kicker. She wrote that she had stayed with me because I was stable and reliable, while she figured out if Blake was serious about her. She was planning to break up with me after my birthday anyway, but the incident at the party just accelerated the timeline. She's staying at Blake's downtown condo now. She said she's sorry for how everything came out, but thinks maybe this is for the best, because now I can find someone more on my level. The audacity of this woman is absolutely breathtaking. Someone more on my level? As if she's somehow above me when I've been bankrolling her lifestyle for years. I packed up all my important stuff: clothes, documents, family photos, collector items, and other personal belongings. While I was going through everything, I discovered that she'd been using my credit card for Uber rides to Blake's apartment for weeks. Over $550 worth of rides that I had been paying for without even realizing it. I called and canceled that card immediately. I also called my landlord to explain the situation. I've got 7 months left on the lease, but I explained what happened and he's willing to let me break it for just 1 month's rent since the building has a waiting list anyway. I can handle that expense. I found a short-term rental in a different neighborhood that's month to month. It's smaller than my condo, but it's in a great location with a view of the park. I just need a place to regroup and figure out my next steps. I finally responded to my friends who had been checking on me. Tyler offered to let me crash at his place whenever I need company, which means a lot. Chloe sent me a long message saying that Madison actually tried to add her on Instagram the day after everything happened, like nothing had occurred, and Chloe immediately blocked her. Connor offered to help me move and even said some of his construction buddies would be happy to have a conversation with Blake if I wanted. I declined that offer, though I genuinely appreciate the sentiment. I still haven't replied to Madison, and I'm not sure I ever will. The weird part is that I don't feel as devastated as I thought I would. Mostly, I feel relieved, like I dodged a bullet. Looking back on our relationship with clear eyes, I can see that I was basically just an ATM to her. I paid for 90% of our dates throughout our entire relationship. I bought her a laptop supposedly for job applications, but she only ever used it for social media. I covered her car repairs whenever something went wrong. I paid her phone bill when she was a little short this month, which happened more often than I care to admit. I paid for her hair appointments that cost more than my monthly car payment. And what did I get in return? Apparently, sex that she was faking enjoyment of the entire time. Constant criticism about my supposed lack of ambition because I didn't want to go into debt buying status symbols, and now public humiliation in front of all my friends. But throughout all of this, I never cheated on her. I never even considered it, not once. When you're in a committed relationship and you're unhappy, you talk about the problems like mature adults. You work together to find solutions. You don't sleep with someone else for months behind your partner's back and then humiliate them in front of their closest friends. So that's where I am right now, taking it one day at a time and trying to rebuild my life. I'm meeting with a therapist tomorrow, which is something I've never done before. Connor has been seeing one since his divorce and says it really helps with processing everything and moving forward in a healthy way. Thank you all again for the support and advice. It's been genuinely helpful knowing that I'm not overreacting and that walking away was absolutely the right move. Major update 1 year later. I didn't expect to be updating this post a full year later, but after reading through it again recently, I thought some of you might be interested in hearing what's happened since that horrible birthday night. Buckle up, because karma doesn't always come quickly, but when it does, it's absolutely spectacular. The week after my original post, I met with that therapist I mentioned. It wasn't as weird or uncomfortable as I had expected it to be. We talked extensively about relationship patterns that I hadn't noticed while I was still in the thick of it. Things like how Madison would make these little passive-aggressive digs, calling my job just logistics coordination whenever I talked about a potential promotion. She'd say things like, "It's fine for now," when friends complimented my condo, always implying that it was temporary and beneath her standards. She was constantly comparing me to her friends' boyfriends who had fancier cars or took more expensive vacations. The therapist helped me understand how Madison would call me controlling if I asked about suspicious texts or late nights. But then she'd go through my phone while I was in the shower. I realized I'd been walking on eggshells for the past year, constantly trying to please someone who was never going to be satisfied with what I could provide. When the therapist asked me what I wanted for my future, I didn't have a clear answer then, but I definitely do now. I went back to work after that first week off, and my boss was incredibly understanding about everything. He even shared that he'd gone through something similar years ago when his wife left him for her personal trainer. We had a really good conversation, and during that talk, he mentioned that our company was opening a new office in Salt Lake City to handle some major shipping contracts out there. They needed an experienced operations coordinator to head up the entire operation. Better title, significant pay increase, and a chance for a completely fresh start in a new city. He put in a good word for me with the higher-ups in the company. Meanwhile, Madison kept trying to contact me through every possible channel. She showed up at Tyler's place at 11 p.m. one night, looking for me and causing such a scene that his neighbors threatened to call the police. She ambushed me in the parking garage at work, crying about how Blake wasn't who she thought he was and how she had made a huge mistake. She kept creating new email addresses and social media accounts to message me after I blocked her previous ones. I finally replied with one clear, direct email. "Madison, we are done permanently. Your belongings that were left at my place have been packed and are with your mother. Do not contact me again through any medium. Any further attempts at communication will be documented and used to file a restraining order." Then I blocked her again on everything. Her mom actually called me about a week later, saying that Madison was devastated and crying all the time. I reminded her that Madison had been sleeping with Blake behind my back for 6 months and had humiliated me in front of all my friends, so her tears meant absolutely nothing to me. Her mom got defensive and said, "Well, relationships are complicated, and everybody deserves a second chance." I disagreed completely and ended the call. Over dinner one night, Connor told me something really interesting. Apparently, Blake had reached out to him through LinkedIn saying he wanted to clear the air about everything that had happened. According to Connor, Blake claimed that Madison had told him I was verbally abusive and controlling, that I monitored her spending and wouldn't let her have male friends. She had apparently convinced him that we were basically broken up for months and were only living together because she was afraid of how I'd react if she tried to leave. Connor, being the good friend he is, told Blake the absolute truth. He explained that I had paid for everything, never raised my voice at Madison, and bent over backwards trying to make her happy. He even showed Blake text messages from our group chat where Madison would brag about how I'd pay for her shopping sprees or take on extra contracts to afford trips she wanted to take. Blake apparently seemed genuinely shocked and said he needed to rethink some things. It turns out he wasn't completely aware of the situation he had walked into. About 2 weeks after my original post, I accepted the job offer in Salt Lake City. I negotiated a substantial salary increase, a relocation package, and even managed to bring my colleague Marcus with me as my deputy. We both got apartments in the same building in downtown Salt Lake City with incredible mountain views. It was exactly the fresh start I needed in an absolutely gorgeous city. Now, fast forward to about 9 months after moving to Salt Lake City. The new job was demanding, but incredibly fulfilling in ways I hadn't expected. I was managing a portfolio of high-end shipping contracts, including overseeing a new distribution center that was getting national attention in our industry. My team had grown from just Marcus and me to 8 dedicated people, and we were consistently outperforming the company's other regional offices across the board. I had started hiking on weekends, exploring the mountains, and really taking advantage of everything the area had to offer. I was meeting new people who knew absolutely nothing about my past drama, which was incredibly liberating. I had gotten into the best physical shape of my life, and even started training for a half marathon. I was regularly seeing the therapist, who continued to help me process everything that had happened and recognize red flags I had missed with Madison. I also started dating again, casually at first, nothing serious, just getting comfortable with being out there and meeting people again. I had a brief relationship with a woman named Luna who worked as a pediatric surgeon. We both knew our schedules were too crazy for anything long-term, but it was really nice to realize that I could connect with someone again without constantly comparing her to Madison or feeling like I needed to prove my worth. One Saturday, Connor called me completely out of the blue. He had been keeping me updated on various events and gossip back in Detroit, but this particular call was different. He was laughing so hard he could barely speak coherently. "Dude, you won't believe what happened," he finally managed to say between fits of laughter. Apparently, Blake had dumped Madison about 2 months after I left town. According to mutual acquaintances who had witnessed the drama, he got completely tired of her constant spending and her dramatic behavior. Madison had expected to move into his downtown condo permanently, treating it like the next natural step in their relationship. But Blake kicked her out after discovering that she had maxed out one of his credit cards on designer clothes without his permission. When she tried moving back in with her parents, her dad flat out refused to let her. Apparently, he had been warning her about her entitled behavior for years and was finally done enabling her lifestyle. With no place to live and her high-maintenance lifestyle to somehow support, Madison was forced to move into a cramped apartment with 2 roommates. She had also been fired from our old company after trying to spread malicious rumors about me and making a complete scene in the lobby when security wouldn't let her up to my old office. Her so-called prestigious administrative role was quickly filled by someone who actually did the work properly. But here's the real kicker that had Connor laughing so hard. Madison was now working as a brand ambassador, which is basically a fancy term for being a sample person at a warehouse store. She was spending her days standing on her feet for 8 hours in a hairnet, begging people to try cheese cubes and frozen appetizers. The same woman who had mocked my career and thought she deserved nothing less than a luxury lifestyle was now handing out tiny cups of juice to shoppers at Costco. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly when Connor told me all this. It was more like a sense that the universe has a way of balancing things out naturally. But the story doesn't end there, because there was still more to come. About a month after Connor's call, I found myself back in Detroit for a major industry conference. Our Salt Lake City office had been selected to present our logistics strategy as a case study, which was a huge honor in the shipping world. I was nervous but well prepared, and the presentation went incredibly well. Afterward, several major companies approached me about potential opportunities, including one who hinted at a partnership position if I ever wanted to leave the corporate world and strike out on my own. At the networking reception following the presentations, I was chatting with some colleagues about future projects when I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. I turned around to see Blake standing there in an expensive but slightly ill-fitting suit, looking genuinely uncomfortable and nervous. "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, glancing around nervously like he was worried someone might see us together. I was genuinely shocked to see him there, but I kept my composure and remained professional. "Sure," I said, excusing myself from the group I had been speaking with. Blake led me to a quieter corner of the reception hall, away from the main crowd. He looked completely different from that night at my birthday party. The cocky smirk was completely gone, replaced with what seemed like genuine remorse and embarrassment. "I owe you a sincere apology," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "What happened that night at your place? I didn't know the full story about your relationship. Madison told me that you guys were basically over, that you were emotionally absent and distant. She made it sound like you knew she was seeing other people and that she was just staying until the lease ended." I just nodded, letting him continue with whatever he needed to say. I was curious to hear his perspective on everything that had happened. "After your friend Connor set me straight about what really happened and showed me those text messages, I ended things with Madison immediately," Blake continued. "But by then, you were already gone and had moved to Salt Lake City, and I didn't know how to reach you or if you'd even want to hear from me. When I saw your name on the conference program today, I knew I had to take this opportunity to say something." "I appreciate that," I said simply, keeping my response neutral and professional. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "There's something else you should probably know. Madison's been trying to get a job at my company for the past few months. She's been telling people around the office that we're still together, and that I'm going to help her get hired in our administration department. I've had to tell HR the complete truth about our situation to protect myself from any potential complications." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "That sounds exactly like Madison," I said. "She's not doing well at all," Blake said, looking genuinely concerned. "She lost her apartment last month and has been staying on various friends' couches from what I hear. I keep getting calls from debt collectors looking for her, asking if I know where she is." Before we parted ways, he handed me his business card. "If she tries to contact you again or causes any problems for you, please let me know. I'll back you up and verify everything that really happened." As we went our separate ways, I felt this strange sense of closure that I hadn't expected. Blake had been a complete jerk that night at my birthday party, but in a way, he was also Madison's victim. He had been manipulated by the same woman who had been manipulating me for years, just in a different way. But the real surprise came the next day. I was scheduled to meet with Vincent Carpenter, the CEO of Westfield Development Group, which is one of the largest logistics companies in the entire Midwest. They were looking to expand their operations into Utah, and my presentation at the conference had apparently caught his attention in a big way. We had arranged to meet for breakfast at his hotel to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted Vincent at a table near the window. As I approached, I noticed he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, wearing a blazer that was trying way too hard to look professional and sophisticated, was Madison. My stomach absolutely dropped when I saw her. She hadn't noticed me yet, but Vincent saw me approaching and waved me over enthusiastically. As I got closer, Madison turned around and the color completely drained from her face when she saw me. "Ah, here he is," Vincent said, standing up to shake my hand warmly. "The man of the hour. Madison was just telling me how you two used to work together back in Detroit." Madison looked like she had just seen a ghost. "Yes, we did," she stammered, clearly panicking about what I might say. "Madison's interviewing for our administrative team," Vincent explained, gesturing for me to sit down at their table. "She says she has extensive experience in logistics administration." I could see Madison silently pleading with me with her eyes, probably hoping I would play along with whatever elaborate fiction she had created about her background and qualifications. In that moment, I had a choice to make. I could expose all her lies, tell Vincent exactly who she was and what she had done to me, or I could take the high road and just keep things professional. "We did work at the same company," I said carefully, choosing my words precisely. "Though we worked in different departments. I was in operations coordination, while Madison worked at the front desk as a receptionist." Madison visibly relaxed for a moment, clearly thinking I was going to play along with her story and not expose her lies. But I wasn't finished speaking. "In fact," I continued, looking directly at Vincent, "I'm a bit surprised to see Madison here today. Last I heard, she was working as a product demonstrator at a warehouse store after being terminated from our previous employer for unprofessional conduct." Vincent's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and Madison's face flushed completely crimson with embarrassment and anger. "I see," Vincent said, his tone shifting immediately from friendly to strictly professional. "Madison, would you excuse us? I need to speak with Mr." He looked at me expectantly. "I gave him my last name professionally. Privately about our business matters," Vincent finished. Madison grabbed her purse and stood up abruptly. "This is completely unprofessional," she hissed at me. "You're just bitter because I left you for someone better." Vincent looked absolutely shocked at her outburst and unprofessional behavior. "That's quite enough," he said firmly. "Please leave before I have to call security." Madison stormed off, nearly knocking over a waiter in her haste to exit the restaurant. Vincent turned to me with an apologetic expression on his face. "I'm extremely sorry about that scene," he said sincerely. "She came highly recommended by a friend of my wife's and claimed to have extensive experience in logistics administration." I shook my head dismissively. "Don't worry about it at all. We all make hiring mistakes sometimes." He nodded gratefully, and we moved on to discussing our actual business. By the end of that breakfast meeting, we had outlined a comprehensive partnership that would eventually lead to me heading up their entire Mountain West regional logistics strategy, with a compensation package that made my current salary look like pocket change. I returned to Salt Lake City the next day feeling strangely light, like a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. The last lingering threads connecting me to my past with Madison had been completely cut, and I could finally move forward without any baggage. I threw myself into work, finalizing all the details of my new position with Westfield Development Group, which I would be starting in 3 months. During those 3 months of transition, something wonderful happened that I wasn't expecting. I met Jade. She was a landscape architect who was consulting on one of our distribution centers, designing native plantings for a courtyard project we were implementing. We started with coffee meetings to discuss the technical aspects of the project, things like soil composition and plant selection. Those coffee meetings turned into dinner conversations that had nothing to do with work at all. Those dinners led to weekend hikes where we explored the mountains together and talked about everything except our professional lives. Unlike Madison, Jade never once asked about my salary or what kind of car I drove. She never complained about my modest but well-maintained truck or suggested I needed to upgrade to something more impressive. She paid for meals just as often as I did, and she actually refused extravagant gifts when I tried to buy them for her. She seemed genuinely more interested in who I was as a person than what I could provide financially. She had her own successful career, her own circle of friends, and her own fulfilling life that she was inviting me to be part of, rather than expecting me to finance and orchestrate everything for her. 6 months into my new role at Westfield, Jade and I were having dinner at my place when my phone buzzed with an email notification. I wouldn't normally check my phone during dinner, but it was from Connor with the subject line, "Dude, check this out." It was a link to a GoFundMe page with the title, "Help Madison Get Back on Her Feet." The photo showed Madison looking significantly less polished and put together than I remembered. She was standing in front of what appeared to be a cheap motel room. The description of her campaign was an absolute masterclass in creative fiction. After leaving an abusive relationship and being blacklisted in my industry by my ex's powerful connections, I've struggled to get back on my feet. Despite my extensive experience in logistics administration, I've been unable to secure appropriate employment due to my ex's vindictive nature. I'm now facing eviction and desperately need help covering first and last month's rent on a new apartment while I rebuild my career. Any help would be deeply appreciated during this incredibly difficult time. The fundraising goal was $4,500. So far, she had managed to raise a whopping $189 from exactly 4 donors, most of whom appeared to be relatives based on their last names. I showed the page to Jade, who was absolutely horrified by what she read. "That's completely false. Shouldn't you do something about this? Report it or something?" I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. Anyone who actually knows me knows that's not who I am. And anyone who doesn't know me well enough to know better, well, their opinion doesn't really matter to me anyway. Let her have her fiction if it makes her feel better. Jade looked at me with this expression I can't quite describe. Part admiration, part something deeper and more meaningful. "You're a genuinely good man," she said softly. "Most people would want some kind of revenge after everything she put you through." I smiled and took her hand. Living well is the best revenge, and I'm living very, very well these days. 2 months later, I proposed to Jade during a sunrise hike in the mountains. It was simple, private, and meaningful. Everything my relationship with Madison had never been. She said yes immediately, without any hesitation or drama. As we're planning our wedding now, a small ceremony with just close friends and family, I sometimes think about that horrible night 2 years ago when Madison humiliated me in front of my friends at my own birthday party. At the time, it felt like my entire world was ending. I thought my life was falling apart and that I had lost everything that mattered to me. Now I realize it was actually the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It forced me to leave a relationship that was slowly draining me emotionally and financially. It pushed me to take professional risks that I might have avoided otherwise, leading to incredible career opportunities. It brought me to Salt Lake City, to Westfield, and ultimately to Jade. It led me to a life that's more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had experienced before. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives are just redirections, pointing us toward where we're actually supposed to be. Last week, as Jade and I were leaving a restaurant downtown after a lovely dinner, I spotted a familiar figure across the street. Madison was standing outside an office building, wearing a sandwich board advertising a nearby store's going-out-of-business sale. Our eyes met briefly across the busy street. I saw recognition flash across her face, followed immediately by shame and then anger. I simply nodded politely in acknowledgement and kept walking, Jade's hand securely in mine. "Was that her?" Jade asked quietly. "Ancient history," I replied, and for the first time since everything happened, it truly was. Final update 2 years later. A colleague just showed me this post that somehow got archived and preserved online. Reading through it now, after everything that's happened since then, feels like looking back at a completely different life. So much has changed and evolved that I felt I should provide one final update for anyone who might stumble across this story in the future. Jade and I have been married for just over a year now, and our life together continues to exceed every expectation I had about what a healthy relationship could look like. We bought a beautiful house in the foothills with enough land for her to experiment with different landscape designs and for me to finally build the workshop I've always dreamed of having. We're expecting our first child in about 3 months, a little girl we're thinking of naming Luna, after Jade's grandmother, who is apparently an incredible woman. Professionally, things couldn't possibly be better than they are right now. The partnership with Westfield evolved into something much bigger and more significant than any of us had initially expected. Last year, Vincent offered me the opportunity to lead an entirely new venture, a boutique logistics firm focused specifically on sustainable shipping solutions, with Westfield serving as the primary investor and strategic partner. I'm now essentially running my own company with the full backing and resources of an industry giant behind me. The stress and responsibility are immense, but so is the satisfaction of building something meaningful from the ground up. As for Madison, I heard through the grapevine about 6 months ago that she finally managed to get her life somewhat together and stable. She's apparently working as an assistant manager at some retail chain now and dating a middle-aged divorced guy who owns a couple of franchise locations. It's not the glamorous, luxurious life she always thought she deserved and was entitled to, but it sounds stable and sustainable at least. I genuinely hope she's found some measure of peace and happiness, and that she's learned from the mistakes she made. Blake, surprisingly, reached out to me about 6 months ago when his company was bidding on one of our major projects. We met for coffee to discuss the potential business relationship, and he apologized once again for his role in everything that happened that night. He said that whole experience was the wake-up call he desperately needed about the kind of people he was choosing to associate with and the values he was prioritizing. We're certainly not friends, but we can work together professionally when our business interests align. People can grow and change, and I respect that he seems to have learned from the experience. Connor and Chloe got married last summer, and we had the honor of hosting them in Salt Lake City for part of their honeymoon. We took them hiking through some of the most beautiful trails in the area and showed them all the best local spots that only residents really know about. We watched Connor try and completely fail to handle the altitude sickness like the tough guy he thinks he is, which was pretty entertaining. They're actually talking seriously about moving out here permanently. The Salt Lake City office needs a good construction manager for our expansion projects, and Connor fits the bill perfectly. Last month, I had an unexpected encounter while traveling. I was at the Chicago airport during a layover, flying back from a major client meeting when I ran into Madison's mom. She was there seeing off a relative who had been visiting. She approached me somewhat cautiously, as if she was expecting me to ignore her or be hostile. "You look really well," she said, seeming genuinely pleased to see me thriving. "Thank you," I replied sincerely. "I am doing very well." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "Madison is doing better now too. She's finally growing up, I think." It took hitting rock bottom, but she's getting there and learning to take responsibility for her actions. I nodded thoughtfully. I'm genuinely glad to hear that. Everyone deserves a chance to grow and improve themselves. She looked at me for a long moment with what seemed like regret in her eyes. You know, I owe you a sincere apology, she said finally. When everything happened between you two, I took her side automatically. Mother's instinct, I guess. But later, when I saw the whole picture and understood what really happened, I realized how wrong I was. I should have raised her better than that. We all make mistakes, I said gently. What matters most is learning from them and doing better going forward. As I walked away from that conversation, I realized something really important about my own emotional journey. I felt absolutely no anger, no lingering resentment, not even satisfaction at how everything had ultimately turned out for everyone involved. Just complete and total peace with the past and excitement about the future. If you're reading this and you're in the middle of a similar storm right now, please hold on to this thought. The pain you're feeling isn't permanent, the anger isn't permanent, and the humiliation definitely isn't permanent. They're just weather patterns passing through your life temporarily. Keep moving forward one step at a time, one day at a time, and eventually you'll find your way to much calmer skies and clearer horizons. The best chapters of your life might be waiting just beyond the worst moments you're experiencing right now.